at Bible time? Who taught you? Do you know? I don't know if he introduced himself. Do you know what his name was? Pastor Josiah. Do you know what? I'm married to Pastor Josiah. That's my husband. I know. He did a great job, I'm sure.
What the?
What? I know. Crazy.
I don't know. You didn't have a husband.
I know you didn't know I had a husband. Here I am with a husband. It's so great. Welcome to Missions Time this week, guys. All week long, we are going to be learning about the life of a missionary and how he sought to bring glory to God with his life. And so, really, that's what we want you to learn about in general this week, about how God's glory goes to infinity and beyond. And so to help us learn that, we picked somebody who went beyond where anyone had ever gone as a missionary before. He went and told people about God who had never heard the gospel before. And so this week we are learning all about David Livingstone. Go ahead and give him a wave and say, hello, David Livingstone. Oh, that was not a good hello to David Livingstone. Try again. Say, hello, David Livingstone. Perfect. Now, look at this picture. Based on this picture, do you think that David Livingstone lived kind of short ago or a long time ago?
Long time ago.
You are very sharp, second grade. Great job. Because David Livingstone did live a long time ago. He was born in 1813.
What?
I know. For you
That's
math
a long
whizzes,
time.
that's 213 years ago. It was a long time ago. And he was born in the country of Scotland. So this is an area called the United Kingdom. It's over in Europe. And he was born in Scotland in a little teeny town called Blantyre, which is about right there.
That's
Tiny. It's not even on the map. It's so tiny. And so he was one of 7 children, and his family was very, very poor. And you know what? This was so long ago that at that time when families were really poor, it was common for the kids to go to work to help make money for their family too. And so, I know what? And so David, when he was 10 years old, started to work at a cotton mill, and he would work there for 14 hours a day. What? I know. So if you guys go to school, or if you know kids that go to school and are there for a long school day, right around today, school days are about 6 or 7 hours long, which meant David was at work twice as long as normally kids go to school. So if you ever come home from school and you're like, whew, I'm beat, that was a long day. He had to do that 2 times as long working. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, when did David go to school? That is an excellent question. And the answer is, at that time, there weren't really rules about kids having to go to school. And there weren't laws about how kids had to go or how long they had to go. The only law they had was that if there was a kid working at a factory who was younger than 12, that factory had to provide a class for the kids to take. But they didn't tell them when the class had to be. And so the factory that David worked at, they offered the class at the end of the 14-hour workday. And so David would get up really early in the morning and he'd go to work at 6 in the morning. And he'd work until 8 at night. And then there would be class from 8 until 10 p.m. Now, I don't know about you, but I am normally pretty sleepy or already asleep at 10 p.m. And that's kind of how most of the kids were too. They were so tired from working in the factory that they didn't stay awake to go to school, which meant that at that time, a lot of kids never even learned how to read. But David was different from a lot of those kids. His dad had taught him how to read when he was 6 years old. And David loved to read. He loved to read all the books that he could, and so he would stay his whole long work day for 14 hours, and then he'd go to class. And he'd listen, and he just took in all the information he could, and sometimes he would even take his school books home, and even though he worked so long and had been up so late, he would light a candle, and he would read by the candlelight, trying to just get as much reading as he could, and then his mom would come over and say, David, you have to get up so early in the morning, what are you doing? And she'd blow out the candle so that he had to go to sleep. And sometimes he'd even take his books, and he'd put them up on the machines at work, and while he was working at the cotton mill and doing what he needed, he'd just look over and read a couple sentences and keep going, because he just loved to learn. And he specifically loved to learn about science. How many of you like science, or like learning about science? Yeah. David loved learning about science, but at this time, it was kind of a problem. Because way back then, people didn't really understand that science and God go hand in hand. Right? Like Bible time today, you learned that God created the world and everything in it. And so if something can be studied, or if something can be discovered, or learned about, it's something that God made. And so when we learn about it, we learn about God, and it brings glory to God. But at that time, David's dad, Mr. Livingston, he did not want David reading about science, because he thought if David was reading about science, he was against God. That was really hard for David, because he loved science, but he knew he should love God too. And so he got to the point that he started asking himself, what am I going to choose? Am I going to choose God, or am I going to choose science? And it felt like a really, really heavy question, until he realized he didn't have to choose. That wasn't something he had to choose between. And it was in 1832 that he read a book called The Philosophy of a Future State. And that does not sound like a very exciting book, but it was very exciting, because in the book, the author talked about how God is a scientific designer, and how he made things with intention, and how when we learned about what God made, that it would tell us more about who God is. It would bring God glory. Well, this is awesome. David didn't have to choose between science and God. They went hand in hand. And so David prayed, and he asked God to be the Lord of his life. He put his faith and trust in Jesus, and he said, God, I want you to be in charge of my life. Lead me to where I should go. And right around that time, he learned that there was a great need for missionaries to go to China. And specifically, they needed medical missionaries. They needed doctors. Well, that's awesome. David could study medicine, he could study science, and he could serve God. It's the best of both worlds. But the only problem was David was still very, very poor. And medical training was very, very expensive. And he was still working at the cotton mill, and almost all of his money went to help his family. But he started thinking, if I saved up everything that I could, how could I have enough money to go to college? Well, he found out that there was a college right here in a town called Glasgow. And it was, see, Blantyre was right there, and then boop, right there. So it wasn't far away. It was called Anderson College. And it was the most affordable college he could find for medical training. So he started doing some math. It would be about 12 pounds to go to the medical college. And then he'd probably need about 12 pounds for somewhere to stay, to eat food, to get his school books. Okay, and he made about 5 shillings a week, and there's about 20 shillings in a pound, and so he made about £1 a month, and after all of his math, he found out if he saved up for 3 whole years, he could have enough money to go get medical training. Well, that was kind of disappointing, because 3 years is a long time, and he would be about 23 years old by the time he was ready to go to college. But he was praying, and he felt like God really was calling him to be a medical missionary. And so you know what he did? He saved up for 3 whole years, and then made the trip. He walked from Blantyre to Glasgow, and he started training as a medical missionary. So how many of you have ever seen one of these before? What is it called? Do you know? Who, do you know? It checks your heart. It's called a stethoscope. And so he probably would have had something like this. You listen and go, boom, 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 where you can hear your lungs. And so he got his medical equipment. He got his books. I'll take questions at the end, okay? And he was ready to go study medicine. And even though he saved up all his money, he was still pretty poor. And so he got to Glasgow, and the only place he was able to afford to stay was a place called the Rotten Row. Does that sound like a nice place to stay?
No.
No, and you're right, it was not. It was a teeny tiny little room, and there was mold growing on the walls. Ooh, gross. But you know what? David was so excited to be at college that he didn't care. And he was learning everything he could about medicine. He loved learning about how to heal broken bones. He loved learning about how to listen to hearts. He loved learning about medicine and how to heal people. And he wanted to learn it all, because he knew as a missionary, you never know what you're gonna get. You need to know all of it. And so he was so sure he was going to be a missionary, that he wanted to, that God was leading him to do that, that during his second term, he applied to somewhere called the London Missionary Society. So London is down here in England. So remember, he's up here studying in Glasgow. Down here in London is the London Missionary Society, and he applied to go and train with them as a missionary. You know what? They accepted him. And so after he graduated, he made the long journey all the way down here to London, and he started to study with them. He was still so smart. He passed all of his exams. He was doing so well, and he started to study and train under the guidance of a man called the Reverend Richard Cecil. And this is where things got hard for David. because the Reverend Richard Cecil did not like David. He was not very kind to David. He was pretty critical of David. So that was really hard for David, but he knew he wanted to bring glory to God. So he worked as he was working for God and not for the Reverend Richard Cecil. And that was going really well. He was doing fine until one Sunday. David was in his room and he heard a knock at the door. And someone was there with a letter. And they gave it to him, and it was a letter from a local pastor at a church. And he said, David, I am so sick. I can't make it to my church tonight to give a sermon. Could you come and deliver a sermon to my church tonight? David thought, of course I will. This is such a good opportunity. I have to know how to give sermons anyways as a missionary. And so he already had one memorized. He was ready to go. He was feeling so confident, so calm. And he got to the church early, and then all of his confidence went away. Because right there in the front row was the Reverend Richard Cecil. And David thought, oh no, he doesn't like me very much. And so what if he doesn't like my sermon very much? And what if he tells the London Missionary Society that he doesn't like it? Or what if, and he had all the what ifs in his mind. And he got up to the podium and he got ready to give his sermon. And he said, friends, I have forgotten everything I have to say. And he closed his Bible and he ran out of the church. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine if you went to church on Sunday and the pastor said, I don't have anything to say, and then ran out? He was so embarrassed. He thought, for sure, I've blown it. Now the London Missionary Society is never going to accept me. And now I'm never going to be a missionary because I forgot everything I was supposed to say. But you know what? Our failings cannot stop God's plans. And God had planned for David to be a missionary. And you know what? The London Missionary Society, they gave him more chances. And he trained, and he was able eventually to give a sermon and to do it well. And so even though David had forgetfulness and he had failed, God's plans still kept going. And it was looking great for David now. He thought, perfect. I'm getting ready to go to China. I'm going to be a missionary. Everything is lining up the way it should. And you know what? God's plans can never be stopped. But our plans are often not God's plans. And our plans can be stopped. That's exactly what happened. Because right around the time that David was getting ready to go to China, there was something called the Opium War going on in China. And it was very dangerous. And it was very scary in China. So you know what the London Missionary Society said? China is closed. No one is going. We're not sending more missionaries to China because it is too dangerous, and we will not send people again until it is more safe and the peace is restored. Well, what is David supposed to do now? He was so sure he was supposed to be a medical missionary to China, and now he couldn't go. He didn't want to just go to any missionary station. He wanted to go where people hadn't heard the gospel before. He wanted to go where people hadn't been treated by a doctor before. He really wanted to feel like he was meeting a need. And you know what? He soon found out that kind of place existed. He met a man called the Reverend Moffat. And the Reverend Moffat was a missionary in Africa. And here he was a missionary in the southern part of Africa. And as he was talking with David, he told him that here along the coast of Africa at the bottom, there were some mission stations. It was pretty well developed. But inland in Africa, in this part, no missionary had ever gone there before. There were a lot of people that lived there, a lot of different tribes of people that had never heard the gospel. They had never heard about Jesus. They'd never heard about the good news that he came to die for their sins. And you know what? They also were very sick. They had never had doctors come to visit them, and they needed help. And so David thought, that's perfect. That's exactly where I want to go. I am going to go and be a missionary in the inland part of Africa. Now, again, no one had ever done this before. So he had to go to the London Missionary Society, and he told them their idea, told them his idea, and they were maybe not very excited, but took a little convincing, and they eventually said, okay, you can go and be a missionary in the southern part of Africa. So David started preparing, and guys, remember, this is a long time ago, so there weren't airplanes to get on. That would still be a pretty long airplane trip to get to the southern part of Africa, but where we showed the map before, up here is the United Kingdom, where London and Scotland all was. So he had to get on a boat, and he got on a boat, and he had to sail down, around, down. It was a long journey, and it was a hard journey, and there was a lot of trials and a lot of struggles and a lot of really difficult, really crazy things happened, and you will have to come back tomorrow to hear all about them, Thank you guys so much for coming to Mission today. You are going on to your next station. We will see you guys tomorrow.